Hello and welcome back to another Lunch and Learn where we have been meeting the pastors of Timberline Church. And whether you're joining us in the audience or online, we're just glad you're with us. I'm Leanne Dilly, I'm the director of the Women's Ministry, and today we are here with Pastor Jeff Lucas. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. And
excellent lunch we had just now.
Yes, I'm glad you liked it.
I did, yeah.
So of course, our method is going to be kind of threefold. We want to get to know you personally, professionally, and then just kind of a little bit about you in general, too.
Okay.
So let's just start with your position here at Timberline. You're described as a teaching pastor. Do you want to tell us any more about that?
Actually, that's just recently, in the last few days, been updated.
Okay.
I've been asking over the last couple of weeks, what's my official title now? And it's apparently Senior Executive Pastor. And so my role here is digging in more with local oversight, and so I'm not big on titles, but titles can be helpful in that they give definition to a role. It's not about status; it's about definition. So that's the current one, but that also involves me being a teaching pastor as well, and involved in teaching team planning and curriculum development, and a bunch of other stuff.
Good. Okay, so I personally want to know about the teaching role. How long does it take you to prepare a lesson?
About 42 years. I actually mean that because it would take me about 15 to 20 hours to prepare a weekend message. But it really is true that it's taken 42 years of doing this to actually develop that, and so it's a double-headed answer to the question, but 15 to 20 hours for any weekend message at least, and longer.
15, 20, wow.
Yeah, quite a bit.
So do you practice it too? I mean, I'm just kind of curious.
I used to preach in front of a mirror, which always my wife thought was a bit weird, and then occasionally, if I was speaking at another church, I used to go in and do 4-day services in churches. So I'd go down to the church and get up on the platform and preach it to an empty church, which was really weird when the facilities guy came in and, I'm preaching up a storm and then actually moving into the offering. So they found that pretty strange. No, I don't practice, but there is a process between preparing a message and having it on my iPad, because it's all iPad now, but then incubating that and getting it into your heart, so that not only have you applied it, but also you can glance at your notes and know where you are. So an average, a 25-minute message would be 8 or 9 pages of notes for me, but I don't read it. But I've got it all there if I need it. So yeah. Different people have different approaches to preparation.
Yeah, I just always wonder that because so many people fear the public speaking thing more than just about anything else in life. So, and I know the type, what I put into 5 minutes. So I thought, wow, I don't know how you do it.
One of my worst experiences, I was asked to speak at a conference, and it was when I was first getting started. And it was 1,000 young people who didn't want to be there, but their parents had threatened to ground them until they were 50 if they didn't show up. And I got up and I was really nervous. And for some reason, I'd written my notes in orange marker pen, which is really stupid. And then they put a Super Trooper spotlight into my face as I got up on the stage. So I've got 1,000 irritated adolescents, and I've got a spotlight in my face, complete darkness, because that means you can't see anybody. And I looked down at my notes and then it disappeared. So I went backstage and threw up. I thought that was a helpful contribution. Best thing to do under the circumstances. Not a very nice thing to say over lunch, of course.
Sorry, ladies.
Yeah, sorry.
I'd like to ask about your writing. You're quite a writer now. How many books have you written, first of all?
36.
36.
Yeah.
So what started the writing?
I did a teaching series on the Father Heart of God, and Adrian Plass, who's a really well-known author in Europe, he'd heard the teaching series, and he just called me because that was way before email or anything, you called or sent a pigeon or something. And he called me and he said, I think you should write this. And then I was pretty rubbish at school, high school, because I wasn't really interested.
Yeah.
But I had this amazing religious education teacher who led me to Jesus ultimately. And I had an amazing English teacher. And he said, Lucas, if you could just be bothered, you could write. And I tried to track him down because I think he'd probably like to know that as a teacher, his inspiration was really helpful. But then I write daily Bible reading notes as well. So I have a 15,000 word deadline every 8 weeks.
Oh.
And then I write for Christianity Today magazine every month. I've done that for 20 years back in Europe. So there's a lot of deadlines, and then the books as well. But recent experience has meant that I'm probably going to not be doing too many more books. Because the Christian publishing world has changed with COVID, and it's a time to stop and review, really.
Yeah, so like what percentage would you say is professional and what percentage is, just writing for therapeutic almost, or?
Well, honestly, now it's all professional.
Okay.
But I get, what happens for me is, I find it helpful. I write a book about something, but that becomes a resource when I'm writing Bible notes, and it becomes a resource when I'm preaching at Timberline. And there's a cross-fertilization of the research, which is really helpful. And then writing daily Bible reading notes. I mean, this probably doesn't sound that great for a pastor to say this, but it keeps my nose in the Bible in a way that is beyond my preaching. And I have to dig for those. And it's just been a discipline, because sometimes it's too easy as a pastor to read the Bible for the sake of a sermon rather than for you. And so right now, for example, I'm going through the Bible I started this Through the Bible in a Year thing, and I think it's going to be Through the Bible in 320 years, because at the moment I'm stuck in Numbers. And I'm like, what is this? But actually, because I just thought, when you get to the bits that are not that interesting, if I can put it like that. I mean,
Or applicable.
Actually interesting, because knowing how many kidneys it takes to offer a sacrifice for however many chaps is not thrilling. I mean, I've tried to be excited about that, but it just doesn't work. But actually, I've found that as I've worked through the book of Numbers, God has really spoken to me a couple of times through these random pieces. I thought I was going to just read this because that's what Christians do. They read the Bible and pray. But actually, I've been surprised, because although it might be heavy weather going through it, all Scripture is inspired, and the Holy Spirit can use that. So, but I don't have to enjoy it either. I can still feel a little bit like, okay, that tribe did this and that tribe did that, and then bring out a few more kidneys and set fire to them. And I'm like, gosh, this is not terribly helpful for me on a Monday morning. So I've been surprised in that, and that's been good.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. I think that it's important to keep yourself fed, probably first and primary, if you're going to lead the flock, so to speak.
Yeah, and again, the danger is that you read the Bible and I've got this software that I've built up over the years, and I love to study. I could study for 10 hours and then not even look at the clock. I just love it. But then it becomes about the presentation rather than the application here.
Right.
And there's always a danger of that. And the danger of thinking that because you believe something, that means that you're applying it. If you want to check out where most businesses go wrong, for example, look at the list of values that are in granite in their entryway. Because they enshrine those values, they automatically think, well, we believe that, therefore we must be doing it. And there's a deception there. And it's been said that when we live consistently outside our values, we tilt into invisible stress because we're living outside of the core of who we are. So being aligned with Scripture, is really important. But I'm actually glad to have made the point that it's not always enjoyable and it's not always thrilling. But that's not the point. It's not always a delight. But God can meet us unexpectedly And I do worry about biblical illiteracy in these days.
Yeah.
Where we have people who have ethical values, they're Christians, but they have no understanding of the biblical aspect of those values, but they don't actually care. It's almost like, let's just approach this from a social justice or a human rights point of view, but never stop and ask, well, what is the biblical worldview on this? So, anyway.
We have a resource. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you tell us, I mean, we've seen you, in front of the church for years, but a lot of us have, but I still want you to go back and kind of tell us about your journey to Jesus, let's just call it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the overview is I thought all Christians were mad. I mean, I think a few of them still are. But I had no intention whatsoever of having any kind of faith. I thought I was a Christian anyway because I was born in Britain. And I know that sounds arrogant, but there's actually a historical reason for that. It's called a post-Constantinian hangover.
Oh.
Do you know what that is? Okay.
Well, I'm getting a feel for it, but no.
Here's the headline. Around 300 and something, the Emperor Constantine declared everybody who lived in the Roman Empire to be a Christian. If you were in the empire, you were Christian. 1700 years later, I'm living under that hangover belief that I live in Britain. It's a Christian country. And I don't know I don't believe that a country can be Christian. There's no such thing as there are countries with Christians.
Right.
But a country cannot be Christian. It might have Judeo-Christian values. Anyway, I'm going off on one again. But anyway, I thought I was a Christian, and my RE teacher, who I mentioned earlier, was extremely patient with me because I was quite naughty. I know that's difficult for you to believe. And she was so patient, and she'd tell me about Jesus, and I thought she was crazy. I used to go along to her Christian club gatherings just to disrupt them and steal the cookies, because the cookies were pretty good. And one night I decided to pray. I had some minor problems on my right foot. I mean, that's very unexciting. It was foot warts, and I was about to have them sort of all removed. And I just sort of said, God, whoever's up there, to whom it may concern, I don't want to have this surgery, so would you sort my foot out? And I got up the next morning and they'd all gone.
Really?
So it freaked me out. So I called her and I said, someone stole my foot warts and I want to know who this is. I went to her church that night with a friend for security because I thought they were all mad. It was a baptismal service, like an aquatic mugging. I'm like, what is going on? There's grabbing people, shoving them under the water. And then I went outside. I got to the end of the service. I thought, this is nuts. And I went outside, sat in my car with my friend, lit a cigarette, cussed up a storm, and vowed I would never go into another church building for the rest of my life. Then I realized I'd left my coat in the building. So I only went back for my coat. What would have happened to my life if I hadn't gone back for my coat? And went back in, and they were having cups of tea and cookies and biscuits, we call them. And one guy walked up to me and he said, "Are you a Christian?" Very unsubtle. And my Constantinian hangover kicked in, and I said, "Of course I am. I'm British." And I immediately knew that I wasn't. I became a Christian that night, together with my friend also. And I met Kay, my wife, that night. But she thought my friend was cute.
Darn it.
Really rude. But eventually she saw the light. And I'm over that now.
Well, since you brought up Kay, and we're women here, we want to hear the story of, how the romance kind of bloomed. And
Well, we were just kids. I mean, when we got married, I was 21, Kay was 18.
yeah.
And she was a senior pastor's wife at 18. That's insane.
You were senior pastor at 21?
Yeah, because we planted a church. I was just a few days short of 22. And so we had, it was a pioneer church planting situation. But we had some older folks in the church who were so sweet because they made me feel like I knew something. So there's this 21-year-old, 22-year-old standing up telling these 60 and 70-year-old people who've been walking with Jesus for 50 years, and I'm telling them how to do life. And they're nodding and smiling. That's right, Pastor. And I found some of the sermons. I mean, it was just drivel. It was like unbelievable. But I've got to just tell you about one gentleman in our church, Mr. Markham. He was a retired headmaster, principal of a school. And he'd wear a jacket and tie at home.
Okay.
Watching TV. He was that kind of guy. And I'd go and visit Mr. and Mrs. Markham, and I'd go to their home and I would impart my wisdom about life to them, and they would nod as if I was saying something vaguely sensible, and they would listen to me. And then they would say, Pastor Jeff, Mr. Markham would say, excuse me. He would say, Pastor Jeff, could we pray for you? What are you going to say? Like, nah, thanks,
Yeah.
And
No need.
yes, please. And they would pray for me for like 20 or 25 minutes. Wow. That God would bless Kay and me. And then, it sounds a bit weird now, I'm not even sure I should share this, but hey, let's do it. I would get up to leave, and he would give me a hug, and then he would plant a kiss on my cheek. And it was a kiss it was a holy kiss of affection and affirmation. Pastor Jeff, we believe in you. You're doing a great job. And he knew his Bible backwards. He could have ripped my sermons to pieces. But it was people like that. So Kay and I were very young in ministry, and we didn't know what we're doing, and sometimes we still don't. But that was 40-something years ago.
Yeah.
And she is the kindest person I've ever met. And I don't mean that as just a slushy. I've watched her, and she's lived with me for 40-something years. So that proves she is so kind and measured and caring. And it's amazing. And we've got friends here today who've been to Israel. We've been on those trips, which are always amazing, because we have this mobile community together. It's not just a trip or a tour, but you fall in love with these people, and you get to know their stories.
Right.
But I watch Kay, and she's up and down the bus, and just a real caring person. Why am I getting all emotional?
Because you're talking about the woman you love.
Did you put something in the food?
No. It's great, and I'm glad that, a lot of women would really love to hear their husbands say something like that about them. So.
Well, it's true, and it's not, and it's a considered statement. And we've met tens of thousands of people in ministry. Another feature, if I can just say this, and God, it's been a real joy to be part of Timberline these 20 years. Because we spent a lot of time traveling in ministry, and years ago, I'd go into a church for 4 days and hold special meetings, and then we'd move on. And right at the beginning of our marriage, God spoke to us and said, you're always going to be saying goodbye. And that was part of, you'll always be, and that happened. Go into a church and you'd meet people and pray with them, and often the best time was with the pastor and encouraging leaders. And then you say goodbye. We were in Malaysia last year or the year before. The most unbelievable people. And then we go to the airport, and normally someone drives us to the airport, and 25 or 26 of their leadership team intercepted us at the airport to say goodbye. And we cry, and they cry, but we're saying goodbye again. My point simply being that being rooted in local church has been such a blessing to us here, because frankly, the days of endless traveling were really challenging. And that was the season when I experienced a year of clinical depression. It really became overwhelming. But I wouldn't undo that experience, because that has given me an empathy for people who struggle with mental health issues. Because it used to be, if you were a Christian, you weren't allowed.
Right.
You know, you felt bad, but then you felt bad because you felt bad, because you're supposed to be ecstatic all the time.
Joy and peace.
Yeah, and I wasn't. And so to be able to write about that and speak about that, you know.
Is one of your books about that?
Yeah, Faith in the Fog is particularly, it's not specifically about depression, but it's about some of the struggles that I went through. But I've talked a lot about mental health issues over the years. And then when you start to unpack it and you look in the Bible and you see Elijah, I mean, he did pretty good, didn't he? You know, I don't know about you, I haven't called fire down from heaven recently or raised the dead this week, but he's like parked in a cave saying, I've had enough, I'm the only one. I mean, he's basically saying, kill me now, God. You know, he's that low. But then when I looked at it and I saw Elijah and the Apostle Paul, who said, I feel the sentence of death in my heart. And then you hear Jesus in Gethsemane. And he says, my soul is overwhelmed. The word there means to be pressed down or to be depressed. And so to validate people and pull them in from outside of the circle of shame that has been created for them and say, you know, it's all right to struggle. Years ago, a friend of mine said, your feelings are not the barometer of your spirituality. And that is so true, that we don't have to measure how much we love Jesus with how up and down we are emotionally. And particularly hopefully at the end of this COVID season, please Lord. So people have said to me, how are you doing with all this? And I've said, depends what time of the day you ask me.
Yeah.
Because it's been an up and down time. Anyway.
Yeah. So I want to get an answer to a question that I posed to you, gosh, probably 6 months ago plus. It was before chapel, and I said, where do you feel most at home, in London or here? Because you travel back and forth. And then the meeting started, and I never got back to an answer. And you told me at the time it was a good question.
It's a good question. I think we feel at home equally in both places. We've been talking about applying for citizenship here for a while, and COVID kind of got in the way of all of that. I love England and being there. I can say this because I'm English. There are aspects of it, of the culture, that drives me nuts. You know, we British can be supernaturally gifted in the whole area of negativity. You know, how are you doing? You know, you say to someone in America, how you doing? Fine. In Britain, how you doing? Not too bad. Or, I can't complain. Like, I'd really like to complain, but I just can't think of anything right now. But I'm sure something's around the corner. So there are, if I may say so gently, there are aspects to American culture that I struggle with. You know, do you want me to give you an example?
Yes, if you've got one, let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a friend, a pastor in Oklahoma, a friend of mine. He talks about the superficiality that there can be in relationships, where, you know, he says, we're the people who say, y'all come back now, but we don't give you our address. And I thought that is really interesting. So I've had people who barely know me who will say, I love you. And I'm like, no, you don't. You don't hardly know my name. So I think at times there can be in Britain, we take a while to say I love you, and that's a fault line with us because we need to warm up. And in America, I think sometimes we rush to it a bit too quickly, and we can cheapen the vocabulary of affirmation when we use words in a superficial way. But I love America. America's been great to us. And Americans, many here, Americans are irrationally kind to British people, which I've never quite understood because we lost the war. You know, that 1776 thing. It was just a minor blip in our history. So, but Americans are so kind to British people. And I wonder whether that's part of the reason God brought us here, because it's enabled me to say things with a slightly crooked smile, I don't know whether you've noticed, early accident, and and a British accent, I've been able to say things in teaching and preaching and writing, but particularly teaching and preaching. And because people are kind to British people generally, I've been allowed to say that. I think in all the years I've been here, we've experienced such kindness and
That's
welcome.
great.
You know, it's been really good.
Good. I'm going to ask a couple of personal questions, I guess. What brings you joy?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious answer, which of course is my grandsons, with whom I am besotted and obsessed. And of course they are the finest grandchildren on the planet, and I'm not biased at all. So...
And where do they live?
They live back in England.
Okay.
Yeah, Stanley is 12 and Alex is 9.
Okay.
And they, see, getting me going again, they just make me sing.
Aww.
Alex sent me a note couple of weeks ago. He'd written a piece and it was about his magnificent grandparents in Colorado. And I'm like, I'm going to help at your college.
Yeah.
That was really... So I love grilling.
Oh, like grilling.
Cooking, yeah. And then just sharing that with friends on a warm Colorado evening.
A lot of relationship stuff is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, and storytelling and laughter. I love to laugh.
Yeah.
I really love seeing people laugh. And that's, in the early years, you know, preachers weren't allowed to be funny. You know, if you were funny, you were probably superficial and lightweight. And then there's a double whammy as well, where if your preacher is funny, but then also if you're a preacher that people can actually understand, then they think you're not that deep because they understood what you said, which is kind of messed up, let's face it. So you combine those two. I battled that because I wanted to be deep and profound. But I think you can be deep and profound without people laboring through it. And laughter is a beautiful connecting piece, because when you laugh at something, you've seen the connection.
Yeah, it's really.
You're also very relaxed. So I love, if I'm preaching at Timberline, I don't tell jokes. I don't know whether you've ever noticed that. Because, first of all, I tell other communicators, don't tell jokes, because a joke has a punchline in old humour, and that's a heavy investment. And if it all goes wrong, you build a barrier, not a bridge. But I say things in a particular way that people find amusing, and I tell stories mainly on myself, almost exclusively on myself, because I have a spectacular gift of ineptitude. So God knows. I think God thought, I'll use him because he's really stupid. And then he'll have lots of illustrations. So like I was trying to get 4 screws out of a speaker cabinet the other day. I went down to Home Depot and in the end I called my neighbour. I said, I can't get these screws out. And because he's offered to help, so I thought I'll take him up on it. And he came over and said, yeah, you just got the wrong screwdriver, and dealt with it in 30 seconds. And I'm like, duh. Okay. So, you know, so my point being, I get joy from sharing the stories and actually genuinely letting people know I can be pretty foolish and messed up. I'm broken, under construction, but God loves me and he uses me. And I'm not fluorescent, glow-in-the-dark, airbrushed perfect.
Yeah.
And being able to share that, but say as well, not just, yeah, I'm a sinner, so come and join me in sin. No, I want to go in a redemption direction as a broken person, and then say, why don't we go together on this journey?
Nice.
Yeah, that's the.
Just.
So, Pastor Jeff, I don't think it's so wonderful to hear your explanation about how you use humor in your delivery, because I don't think a lot of people in our congregation that they see that your different style as opposed to some of the other pastors, but I don't think that they understand where you're coming from using that sense of humor. So I really appreciate that explanation. But when I was on the trip to Israel a couple years ago with you and Kay, number one, I saw a different side to both of you on that trip, especially the night when Bobby and I had an issue at the hotel at the Dead Sea, and we could not get a proper room or whatever it was. Pastor Jeff spent an hour and a half working with the hotel people there to try and ensure that Bobby and I had gotten a proper room. And I saw an aspect of you that I had never experienced from you being up in the pulpit. And it just really endeared me to both of you more for having been on that trip. So there's a plug for another trip for you, for other people. But I also wanted to ask you, a few years ago, you brought Searchlight Theater to our campus, and they came back again. Do you have any plans to try and bring them a third time? And I think audience participation in the characters in their plays was, for me, it was a real delight. But I just was curious if you plan on doing that.
Yeah, I'm passionate about the arts and seeing the arts fully expressed in church. Church historically has become often about words, and somebody said in Jesus the word became flesh and we've turned him back into words again. And theatre, poetry, dance, when I've had services back in England where you've got a sculptor creating a sculpture during the sermon or painting a huge canvas where the poets are released to share what they do. And somebody came up to me one time and said, where'd you get all this creativity stuff in the Bible? So I said, well, without sounding like Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning. In the beginning, God created. And then when you look through with the priests with their vestments and robes in the Old Testament, and they're ringing bells and they're smelling the message through the incense, and what's it all about? It's all about drama. It's all because we are created to be multidimensional people who don't just hear a message, but they see it, they feel it, they touch it, they experience it. So that's the reasoning behind that. And yes, I mean, I would love to see summer seasons at Timberline. We've got in this campus, we've got 2 studio theatres right here.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to see theatre groups creatively serving our community. And so hopefully Searchlight will be part of that. And it's great. Now, when they come, that means they stay with Kay and me and 4 actors in the house. And I mean, it's interesting, but it's good.
We are going to have to say goodbye to our Facebook and online friends soon. But before we do, could you just tell us how we could pray for you?
Yeah, I think pray that Kay and I will keep hearing God, will keep knowing what the seasons are. Because I'm 65 in July. I look older, I've had a rough life. And, that means that I'm hoping it's a lengthy horizon, but there will be transitions and changes in the coming years. And so to know that. And then finally, just for the protection of our wider family.
Okay.
I'd really appreciate that.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks for joining us, friends. And we will see you next time when we'll be with Pastor Steve Harris.